All right, so now up next, and we actually have a personal story I'm going to ask our next guest speaker to speak about with this artist. So we have our keynote speaker, Rudich, as the founder and CEO of MediVector. Appy's incorporated a number of transformational initiatives at his Boston-based pharmaceutical firm. And let's all please welcome our long-term client and friend of the firm, Appy.
Great. Thank you very much for this beautiful introduction. And I think Thanksgiving season is the right season to give this talk to during, mostly because SMA, I apologize, the two of you, was instrumental in this MediVector success with DoD. And let me ask for the next slide so that to confuse you.
I'll control the slides, so just let me know when you like me to flip, and I might, as you talk, I might flip in advance.
Right. Next one, please.
All right. Great. Did that work?
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't work. All right. So, Blake, can you do that? Perfect. Blake,
great.
Thank you.
This is not continuation of Sarah's talk. It is actually a lithograph that hangs over my fireplace. And so thank you, Liz, Sarah, AJ, and Jack for this beautiful talk on Rudich. So let me move to the next slide and say and talk what I will talk about.
And so can I ask you to share what you shared with me in terms of you actually?
Right. I was actually Rutich's chauffeur for a couple of years. As you've noticed, he was having troubles walking, and his house on the Croatian coast was very close to our house. So I frequently drove him to his house, and he gave me this lithograph that I have at home as a thank you for all my troubles, which were actually not troubles at all. It was a great deal of fun traveling with somebody who was trying to provide, I wouldn't call it a socialist, but slightly different approach to the divide, artificial divide between socialism or communism and capitalism. But let me move to the conversation that AJ asked me to give, and thank you very much for it. I appreciate the opportunity to communicate how much SMA helped, and I apologize for using old name.
That's
I'm like Markov process with 0 degrees of freedom. I can't move to the next step and forget about the previous one. So I will speak about my background. I'll have to spend significant amount of time talking about biotech industry, mostly for 2 reasons. The first one is that unlike everything you guys do, which is fairly linear, I would call it, biotech industry is highly iterative, which means that you more frequently than not goof up and have to correct. And that creates significant problems in an environment like EVMS. And allow me to talk about that. Then I will describe our joint contributions and perhaps sketch out a program that we, meaning SMA and MediVector, have been working on for last year. Next slide, please. If you describe me from the outside, you would call me a serial entrepreneur, but that's not how I think about myself. I think of myself as somebody who sees an opportunity and tries to shape it and possibly mix it into a company. And this sort of description comes from my 12 years of pre-college. I spent 12 years studying Latin, Greek, and all the things that Europeans think of as a classical education. And the upshot of that is that one starts to focus on two things, which is that you adapt quickly and that you focus on trying to help humanity in some substantial way. So, and my second huge influence was MIT, which sort of taught me to not to bother by constraints of a discipline, but think freely. And I have awful lot of slides. I will be talking in parallel to them. And so if you get bored with my accent, which is atrocious, you can always go back to the slides. Next one. So I have created a significant number of companies, and I will speak about two of them. One of them was a major success, and perhaps also claim to my infamy in certain circles. If you are not exactly millennial, you may remember telemarketing, and company that has produced that is called Neomatics. And I hate to tell you who was there. My Fifth Amendment statement is that I did this unintentionally, because all we were trying to do is the increased number of telephone calls people were using telephone for.
Okay.
And my second sort of failure is really highlighting how difficult it is to work with DoD. And that company is called Medex Tools. And what we invented was really a combo of laser and a robotic arm and AI system. So lasers is something that the Lincoln Lab would do. And yes, they were inventors. And the trouble was that we could never establish who will fix the laser issues if they ever crop up, as they did. And so the project died. And so what I've just, and please go to the next slide, I explained to you why it's difficult to accomplish something in pharma industry. And so let me now talk about what's so special about pharma industry. And the theme you'll hear is how difficult it is to pull together a team and how difficult is it to take care of the process. So let's go to the next slide, which describes what's important about pharma industry. And please, next slide. It turns out that on average, you get at least $3 out of dollar invested in pharmaceutical industry. And pharma is not as important as one would think in healthcare delivery. It's only 10%, but it represents an interesting target politically. I would really like to stress another number, which is that if you control properly diabetes, you save $36 for every dollar invested in control, which is an incredible number. And this number is sort of the reason why the industry does what it does well. Next slide, please. I'll now try to describe what are the main issues in the industry. And next slide, please. And The first one is that typically in frequently purchased consumer goods, you live forever from an invention. A telephone was invented in 903. Post serial was invented at the end of 19th century. And yes, we still use them and still have AT&T and General Mills to worry about as major entities. Yet in the pharma industry, you have 20 years to exploit the patent. And fundamentally, it's really 10 years because it takes you 10 years to develop something. Also, however much we think about medicine and medicine knowing what they're doing, that's not really true. We really don't know what we are doing. So our probabilities of success are very, very small. And the process is highly complex. In engineering, you have a couple of equations like force equals acceleration times mass, and that's immutable. In pharma industry or biology, you have stories. And if stories sound coherent, you can prove parts of them, then they work. If not, they don't. And the next 2 points are really key and very different from any other industry. That you need to have a highly functioning team. And that's really difficult to accomplish, as you well know. And the other part is that the risk is something that for safety, that's very important. As you all know, a drug is a combination of something that's effective and a trade-off and between effectiveness and safety. Too much of everything kills you. Some of you may remember the fact that my favorite sweetener, saccharin, kills mice in high degrees and with high speed. So risk profile is very important. And that's especially true when talking to or realizing another thing, which is that every drug has to be approved by FDA, which is a governmental bureaucracy, and each of the governmental bureaucracies is highly inflexible. Thank you for changing to the next slide, AJ. So the two major points about the process, which goes from petri dish to small animals, bigger animals, humans, and then convincing FDA that you have something, is this highly iterative nature of the process. And I ask you to remember EVMS, which is anything but iterative. Mm-hmm. And then let's talk about or remember timelines, which are hugely important. Next slide, please.
Abby, can I ask you a question on the prior slide?
Yeah.
This for everyone's edification, NDA is new drug application into the FDA. And you mentioned that probably at best, pharmaceutical companies have 10 years really to monetize their investment. And so how do I compare that 10 years to these, the years you have under phase 1, phase 2, phase 3?
Okay, so to get from petri dish to first in humans, which is phase 1, mm-hmm. is roughly speaking 3 to 5 years. Going from humans to NDA is anywhere from 5 to 8 years.
Okay.
And the drug typically sets with FDA, that's called new drug application, for a year.
Got it.
And you have a timeline on this slide too. 0 to 12 years,
Mhm.
and probability of success. I'm asking you to note, even when you go to FDA, in principle, you have only 71% chance of succeeding.
Interesting.
So it's a crapshoot.
Okay. And by the time you patent it, almost 10 years has already been consumed of the 20-year patent life.
Right.
Got it. Okay.
So why drugs cost so much? And the question is really related to 2 points that I sort of glossed over. The first one is that drug has to be a blockbuster, meaning earning $1 billion a year, every year for a significant period of time, at least. Some drugs generate $15 billion. And I remind you that out of that, roughly speaking, 30% is profits.
Mhm.
And that's what everybody gets excited about. But if you look at the likelihood of success, it's really scary. Another metric that one wants to see is how long does a company stay in a leadership position in the industry? And it doesn't. A year or 2 or 3, problems. The industry is very, very fragmented, mostly because everybody is trying to figure out how to cut down the cost, mostly because that's the only thing we as MBAs know how to do. And that is rough because that desire to cut costs deals with team cohesion, and needless to say, that doesn't work well. And then lastly, the science is against or moving in a direction that's inconsistent with blockbusters. We are talking about personalized medicine, which means that if you're designing a drug for a person, you can't charge them $1 billion to get ahead. So that sort of is perhaps a contradiction in terms, but points to you how difficult it is to succeed. The second sort of, next slide, please. The second reason why drugs cost so much is this misalignment of incentives and rewards. Scientists get rewarded for succeeding with the drug. So in principle, they continue lying to you that they have something where they really don't, because it's difficult to figure out when the drug has failed, because some of the drugs have actually succeeded after many, many failures. And my favorite joke is to describe Viagra as a drug that was designed originally for hypertension. We all know that we are not using it for hypertension. So,
Got it. Yep.
Right. I'm reminding you that it's really difficult to succeed with drugs. And MediVector has a personal experience with a drug that was first in class, and we couldn't find a pharma buyer. And yet 2 years after that, a lower quality drug showed up and was sold for $2 billion.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows? Next slide, please. And this is my favorite slide. The red part is called surprise factor. It compares the expected with what actually happened. And I would like you to go to the last row and notice that one of the major high-flying biotechs goofed up so much that their inability to run proper regulatory function costs them, in essence, their future, and their price has never recovered from that, and it's been now 10 years since that happened. Next slide, please. And the next part is why I actually keep telling on every occasion I can to Ajay and Jack that you guys have a major role to play in this industry. Project management really doesn't exist as a real function in pharma and biotech. And I will illustrate this with 2 points. Let me talk about the vertical line, which talks about, on one end, project management-centric programs and department management-centric programs. And I'm comparing 2 things: influence over pay and promotion, and we all know that we depend on pay and promotion heavily, that in every other industry is dramatically higher than in pharma, and the same is true for influence over project staffing. And this is not an old result. John Van Manen and Ed Schoen are sort of big names, at least in the East Coast, when it comes to organizational development, and I'm clearly using a very old term for the field. They repeated this 4 years ago when they were preparing for their next book. And so the results haven't materially changed. Let me move to the next point. So the next reason why the situation with drugs is so difficult is financing. The obvious thing on the graphic that I'm presenting you with is that there's one dominant bar, which is 28%. And if you remember, this is clinical trials or human trials from 1 to 3. It's roughly speaking 30% of your cost. So guess what? You're looking at 10% chance of succeeding and 30% of, roughly speaking, $2 billion. Would you dare to make a choice? That's a rhetorical question. So let's move to the next slide, please. So what's so difficult here? And this is really a summary slide so that I can explain why SMA's contribution to MediVector and DoD was so important. So we have an awful lot of clashes in values, norms, and practices between science and the business. We have highly risky financing. We have highly speedily moving science. And we need to keep a cohesive team. So those are the challenges. They are what they are. You can't succeed without reconciling them. Next slide, please. And so I would like to talk next about what SMA and MediVector jointly accomplished. Next slide, please. So bluntly, without SMNA, we couldn't have won the proposal. And without AJ and Jack helping me deal with vagaries of EVMS, I don't think I could have survived for 5 years. Our win was highly convincing. There were supposed to be 7 or 6, depends upon who is telling the story. DoD decided that the 3 is enough. And in 6 months, they eliminated 2 of our competitors. So we were standing alone for 4.5 years. We did not do this alone. We had help not only from DoD, which was incredibly good. And I again thank SMA for helping us get there. USAMRIID, which is Army's research arm, and a CRO. And at the end of the day, we were 30% faster than anybody else. That includes Roche, Pfizer, and Merck. And that's sort of important to remember how dramatically bigger they are than MediVector and even SMA combined. MediVector had 50 full-time people and roughly speaking 100 consultants. And I'm sure you know how big Roche, Pfizer, and Merck are. And the next point is one of budgeting. Again, thanks to SMNA, we managed to stay fairly close to the budget, meaning we started with ask for 135 million. We spent 230 million, and 30 of that was spent on Ebola. So we basically didn't go over too badly. And most importantly, we actually produced a path for that drug to approval. This chart needs some explaining. In principle, when you look at any viral disease, be it influenza or COVID-19, you worry about how much infection there is in tissue culture. And the other part that you worry about is who does this benefit? So it turns out that our drug actually works on a tissue culture level. So when we were doing a phase 3 first round attempt at approval, we missed defining so-called endpoint. The other important part is that the drug works for more sick patients. And I will facetiously remind you that in this country during COVID pandemic, 7,000 people a week died who are slightly older than I am, but who are elderly, and we had nothing to help them with.
Yeah.
So let me repeat the accomplishment. For 5 years, we almost developed the drug, and we can easily repeat those accomplishments. The next slide, please. I would just like to highlight one number, which is that we had 2,000 patients across the entire planet while we are doing this, and we managed to keep track of all of them. Next slide, please. So let me go to the last point, which is focusing on the next or possible next step between SMA and MediVector. Next slide, please. I have been clearly saying that we did not succeed as a country to contain COVID-19 epidemic. And there are many institutions to blame, but perhaps the biggest miss is not realizing that responding to unknown threats, that you don't have a system in place. You have an institution who can quickly adapt plans. And that's much more DoD than either CDC or any other institutions I list here. So let me move to the next point. So next slide, please. If you look at what we have currently, we have answers to known viruses. That's the list of them. We missed COVID-19. So clearly we need to worry about unknowable. Next slide, please. And I'm giving you a technology that Harvard developed and SMNA and MediVector are trying to socialize in appropriate government agencies. The sort of what looks like intestines is actually a description of an antibody. And what's different is this green square, which says intervention point. Antigenic peptide could be from any pathogen. What that says in English is that one really doesn't have to know and depend on Chinese to give us the genetic copy of virus. All we need to know is that somebody is infected with whatever we don't know about, and we have a mechanism to create that. I'm reminding you that biotech, i.e. Pfizer and Moderna, actually need to have the virus to do something about it. Next slide, please. And this ability to deal with wide variety of antigens allows us another thing. We really don't have to wait for Delta variant to develop. We can develop it in parallel. That's called multiplexing, I believe, and Jack will be most likely smiling.
Yes.
So let me move to the last slide and say to AJ, I actually finished whatever 31 slides ahead of time, which you didn't believe.
You're doing excellent, Abby.
So the last slide is actually saying that we have already socialized this slide deck with DoD, and they've noticed that what we have is possibly a breakthrough innovation. And now that I finally moved in, I will start bugging Ajay and Jacques and Wilcon and Dave and John and Dave Patterson and John Rood to go to the next step and move this program further. So thank you very much for listening. And as my last statement, thank you, Ajay, and thank you, Jacques, and thank you, Liz, for leading this program, MediVector's program forward. Thank you.
Abby, that was just such a powerful story. Please stay on, because I think I want to kind of talk about a few things which actually relates to some of Drucker's principles. I think one of them is actually about responsibility for and measuring outcomes, not just activity, about results. Right. And I think and that theme actually is, I think, Drucker's 7th principle. But I think for us, there was a huge amount of alignment, if I can use that word, between Abby, yourself and your culture at MediVector and SMA in terms of having really shared responsibility for project outcomes. Absolutely. Which goes to the heart of our approach to project management. And I think what you so appropriately noted is perhaps a fresh way of thinking about how the most difficult part of that whole process is around development. How that, how actually that 30% of that cost can actually be managed much more effectively.
I will tell you, AJ, working with Appy and MediVector was an incredible experience for us as well, because it's the dream, the holy grail is a CEO who actually uses earned value. And the first time I met Appy, he came to me with his list of books he'd already read before any training or anything else about earned value. We started having conversations around how earned value needed to be more agile. That was absolutely incredible. It was a great experience, and that just kicked off the whole thing. It just shows that I think the synergy, but also the value that you can derive by managing appropriately.
Yeah, Appy, do you have any comments about that? You're probably very unique in terms of actually research.
I think you guys should take significant share of gratitude from my part and from DoD's part. And EVMS is the language that DoD uses, and whoever doesn't use it makes a huge mistake. And you guys helped us do this specifically, and I still remember the people. And I know they hated whenever I showed up over their cubicle, but I had to ask questions, and they were patient, and we managed to communicate to DoD clearly two things. First, that we need to totally reorganize the program from this point forward, and how this reorganization will impact the budget and EVMS in EVMS language. And that happened twice. And according to the guys who became our friends in DoD, hadn't we be able to do this clearly and cleanly, they would have junked us.
Presented an excellent story, and thank you so much for being willing to talk very sincerely about your own personal story as a part of that. And I think, and we of course are very thankful for the opportunity you gave us to actually assist you in that success.